Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. I'm Ross, and I'm live from the Athenaeum in Jackson, Louisiana, home of HOREB Institute for the Historical and Objective Research and Exploration of the Bible, and home of United Israel World Union Center South. Thank you very much for joining me today for my class. Spoiler alert, Moses didn't write this. If you saw the thumbnail this morning, we're talking about time. We're talking about biblical time, sacred time, and the way that the authors recorded it. We are in the midst of an annual study called the Pentateuch in Perspective. We are currently in the book of Exodus. This is our final lesson in the book of Exodus. We begin next week with a study of the book of Leviticus. We'll talk about that later. We'll also talk about that in the after-class discussion. But we're in the final reading, the final Torah portion of the book of Exodus, known as Pekudey. You'll find it on page 238 of your Exodus Torah tablet. It covers Exodus chapter 38, verse 21, through the end of Exodus, and that is chapter 40 and verse 38. And I wanted to read you the description of the class so we're all on the same page. I don't want to leave anything out. I carefully crafted this. This week's class explores Torah portion Pekudey, the final chapter of Exodus, and lifts the curtain on a hidden reality behind the text and the fingerprints of a later hand. Join us as we examine narrative anachronisms. Most of you know this term, but you will certainly get a deeper understanding of that today. And we're going to compare synoptic sections of Exodus and Numbers using a horizontal reading method to reorder events and timelines based on the text itself. What are the clues the text gives us, and what are the clues that the text conceals? Careful readers may find that some of the most sacred stories contain spoilers. Have you ever been to a movie? You're seated in the theater, or maybe you're on the couch at your house, your spouse, your significant other, your kid, your grandkid, somebody is with you, and they've seen the movie. And they're sitting there, and you're sitting there, and you're eating your popcorn or whatever, maybe a healthier snack, I don't know. But you're watching it, and the person says, oh, whoa, 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 you're going to love this part. What's going to happen? This guy's going to go in the building, and the bad guy's right. And you're like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Don't tell me what's going to happen. That's a spoiler. We find those in the biblical text. Somebody is writing who already knows the material that's coming. Now, some of you may say, well, of course, because it's divinely inspired, or Moses is writing, or whatever. But there is another answer. There is another possibility that's more likely, and we're going to talk about that other possibility today. And some of you will agree with those conclusions. Some of you won't. It's okay. We have a discussion afterward that's designed just for that, to have good, wholesome, generous conversation with authentic inquiry and some back and forth. In some ways, today's study, the main purpose of today's study, is going to look at the way that the biblical writers record time, what I call sacred history. A lot of times people are very critical of the biblical text, and what they'll say is the biblical writers aren't employing the genre of history the way that we think about it in modern terms. And to some degree, I understand that there's some truth in that. If you read works by scholars like Bruce Halpern, then that is partially true. But nonetheless, history is history. And what we need to do is we need to see as we work through if what we're reading is actual history or if it's more sacred history, which I would sort of expand to include maybe a little bit of myth, a little bit of expansion to the actual details, but we'll see some of that as we get in. There is a phrase that's known among the sages, mainly in rabbinic literature, that says in English there's no early or late in the Torah. Or some might translate it, there's no earlier or later. Now, in Hebrew, that phrase is ein mukdam u mechar b'Torah. And what it's saying is that things may not be in order. It's used in various comments, in various commentary, to explain some very difficult things. This phrase is often cited. In fact, it's always cited in rabbinic literature whenever there is chronological concern for what is written on the page. Chronological concern is a politically correct way of saying something a little bit more harsh on the ears of apologists. And here is, let me make it a little more plain. The traditional answer to chronological inconsistencies is that in cases where events are out of order, let's say we read something in the text which should be later, or something earlier in the text which should be later, the most common traditional answer is to say that that's purposeful. That here in these instances, I would say, instances of inconsistencies, the apologist will argue that the point is not the order in time, but some other hidden reason, some other reason to place an event or something in a text. Like if you read it, you go, that doesn't go there. And we're going to look at some of these examples. Some of the answers to that is, well, of course it doesn't go there chronologically. The writer has pulled that into the text here for another reason altogether. And some of those reasons are thematic. Some of those are theological. Now, what I want to do, I want to begin with a text in Exodus chapter 16. Look at Exodus 16, verses 31 through 35, and that's on page 100 in the Torah tablet, if you have it. Exodus 16, beginning in verse 31. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, this is the thing which Jehovah hath commanded. Let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot, put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it before Jehovah to be kept throughout your generations. As Jehovah commanded, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to a land inhabited. They did eat the manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is a 10th part of an ephah. Now let me talk about this text for a moment. This particular text, chapter 16, gives a lot of detail about the bread. In fact, you can go all the way back up to the beginning of chapter 16, and as you work through, you're going to see that this is the story of the manna. Now, many people assume that this is chronologically where this goes. Why would it not be here? If you read chapter 12 of Exodus, this is the story where they're departing. Chapter 13 tells the story of the firstborn. Chapter 14 is Beshalach, and when Pharaoh let them go. Chapter 15, they cross the sea. Chapter 16, they murmur because there's no food. They wish they had the food they just had. And what happens? It tells the story of how the manna comes. So you would assume anyone who reads this, thinking they're reading a historical account, would say, this is the time that they're eating the manna, and therefore they're learning that you pick it up on these many days and not on the Sabbath. You get the point. But what's striking about the passage that I just read is that it can't be written by Moses, and it can't be written at that time in the narrative. Now, how can I say that with such certainty? Because some of you might say, well, maybe, but why would I say that? Well, let me tell you why. First of all, they've not yet made it to HOREB. They've not yet made it to Sinai. They've just come out of the sea. So they've got 39 years left, give or take, right? We're going to talk about 40 years in a little while. But they've got a long time left in the wilderness, and yet this particular passage, this pericope, says that they ate it for 40 years in the wilderness. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's not true. I'm not saying that they didn't eat it for 40 years. What would be appropriate here, what would be expected, is if it said, and you're going to eat this for the rest of the time you're in the desert, and it won't stop until you go into the promised land. But that's not what it says. This is a writer who at the earliest is writing after the 40 years and after they've already gone into the land, because it says very clearly that that's the case. They did eat the manna, verse 35, until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan. Now, a couple of other clues that this is written later. This talks about Moses telling Aaron, put some of that in a jar and put it before the testimony. What's the testimony? We've not yet received the testimony. The testimony, according to the priestly writer, is not it's the 10 commandments or the 10 words on 2 stone tablets. That doesn't happen until much later in the story. We don't even get the day of assembly where God speaks the 10 words out of the fire on the mountain on the day of assembly until later, until 19. This is chapter 16. So you see, this is written out of order. Now, chronological inconsistencies are referred to by a term that comes to us from the Greek, which I've explained before, and we say in English, we anglicize anachronism, but it's from 2 Greek words, ana, which means backwards, and chronos, which means time, backwards time. It's when an event gets into a text from another period, all right? So from an academic and critical perspective, these cases of anachronisms, of later time or backwards time, are clear indications of signs of another hand. Someone is writing something, they know what's coming and they're telling us about it. It's like the guy or girl in the movie theater who's going, hey, pay attention, you're going to like this part. Well, that's what this is. This is a spoiler alert. It's telling me when they get the first bit of bread that that they did eat it, not that they're going to eat it, that would be fine, but that they did eat it for 40 years. You see? So this is what is, I think, one of the most eye-opening tools that we'll be able to get when we're studying these things. It helps us to determine authorship. That's what we're looking for. Okay, now the Pentateuch, as you've seen, if you've been studying with me for a while, and if this is new to you, you will see that the Pentateuch contains many interesting inconsistencies in time and other places. In other words, it's not just time that we see inconsistencies. Now, the first thing that I wanted to let you know is, I know that there are fundamentalists and apologists who go to extreme lengths to explain away and give other reasons for inconsistencies. But inconsistencies are there. Very clearly, I'm telling you the truth. Stick with me. You'll see some of these even today. The first thing I want to do is bracket some time. I want to kind of begin to put us in focus as to what we're going to look at today. All right? So I want to focus, first of all, within the Pentateuch. This is where, like, you shift your focus to the Pentateuch. And within the Pentateuch, I want to focus on the life of Moses. I'm going to keep bringing you in closer and closer to a specific time frame that we're going to look at today. So if I talk about the life of Moses, I'm really talking in the Pentateuch from Exodus chapter 2, where we meet the bouncing baby Moses' birth, all the way unto Deuteronomy 34:12, when someone, actually it's verse 5, where someone describes his death, other than Moses, because it doesn't make sense that Moses would describe his own death, but another writer. But that's the life of Moses, from birth to death. Now that's Exodus 2 through Deuteronomy chapter 34:5. Now, according to the narrative, according to the priestly writers, Moses lives 120 years. So from the beginning of Genesis all the way to the end, we've got a much larger period of time, but I want you to focus with me on 120 years. Everybody there? Everybody looking at 120 years, birth of Moses, death of Moses. Come closer. Now, I want to go within the years of the life of Moses to the time that they spent roughly, give or take, in the wilderness. And that's 40 years. So all of time down to 120, down to 40. Now, there are some passages which tell us that the children of Israel were punished for 40 years, but they had already been in the wilderness for a little bit of time when this happens. We're not going to go into that level of detail. So let's just say the time in the wilderness is, give or take, 40 years. Now we're going to put some text in the comments, but these texts aren't. We're not going to read them all, but let me just give you a few examples. These are the texts that mention 40 years in the wilderness, give or take. Remember, I have to say give or take because there's a little bit of math that we have to show you later on. Exodus 16:35, Numbers 14, verse 33 and 34, Numbers chapter 32, verse 13. You'll see these in the comments. Deuteronomy 1:3, Deuteronomy 2:7, Deuteronomy 8:2 and 8:4, and Deuteronomy 29:5, or chapter 29, verse 4 in the Hebrew. Then we don't see mention of 40 years again until Joshua 5:6, and then get ready for this. There's no mention of 40 years in the wilderness anymore until much later. We see it in Amos chapter 2 and Amos chapter 5. We see it once in the Psalms and once in the book of Nehemiah. Now, this is for another discussion. It's not mentioned that many times in the text, but we do get the idea that there's 40 years, so that's where I want you to focus. Down from 120 years of the life of Moses to 40 years in the wilderness. So within the life of Moses, and furthermore, within the 40 years, give or take, I want to narrow that focus even further. So come closer to the text. See, this is all about getting you in the text and making you, or encouraging you strongly, to look at what it says. Get a magnifying glass out. 40 years. Now we're going to narrow our focus to the time that Israel spent at HOREB or Sinai, okay? So now they're not at HOREB and Sinai for the full 40 years. They're somewhere else, but they are at HOREB for a certain period of time. That's where I want to focus. So you're going to come closer with me. They arrive in the wilderness of Sinai, as the priestly writer puts it, on the first day of the third month of the year they departed from Egypt. So that's year 1, month 3, day 1. I want you to go with me to Exodus chapter 19 and verse 1. That's on page 110 of the Torah tablet. 19:1 says, in the 3rd month, after the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. Now, there's another verse I want you to look at. Look at page 102, which is Exodus 17, verse 6. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and you shall smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Now, according to this text, chapter 17 has them already at Rephidim, is what it says in verse 1, which evidently is synonymous with Horeb. Now, the way, again, apologists, fundamentalists will seek to reconcile these inconsistencies. What they'll say is, no, Horeb is the region, right? Like Canada, and Sinai is like Ottawa. It's a specific place. I'm not from Canada, so forgive me, but you get the point. It's like they're trying to show how both of these can be correct. But we already know that they're already there. But be that as it may, let's go ahead and say that they arrive, according to Exodus 19 in verse 1, on year 1, month 3, day 1. Now, they're going to stay there at Horeb, at Sinai, for a certain period of time. Thankfully, the priestly writers give us this window that we're focused on. They tell us. In fact, this is a bulk of what we're going to be studying, not only today, but throughout a good portion of the Pentateuch, is this time here and that I'm focusing on today. They're going to stay at Horeb until Numbers chapter 10, verse 11 and 12. So let's look at that. Numbers chapter 10, and I'm going to pick up verse 11. And it came to pass in the 2nd year, in the 2nd month, on the 20th day of the month, that the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel set forward according to their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud abode in the wilderness of Paran. So this is giving us some news. Numbers chapter 10, verse 11 says, okay, get this, 2nd year, 2nd month, 20th day of the month, cloud lifts, moves, stops over the wilderness of Paran, and the children of Israel follow that cloud and go to the station at Paran, okay? And we're going to talk more about this cloud shortly. But so what I really want to show you is that if we do the math, and I hate math, but bear with me, this isn't that difficult. And if I mess it up, someone gently correct me, because I don't claim to be a math teacher. But follow me on this. It's not too difficult. The time at Horeb is as follows. From year 1, month 3, day 1. Now, you go, well, how do you know it's day 1, Ross? Well, it says new moon. It's the Hebrew for new moon in Exodus 19. Year 1, month 3, day 1. Some people have argued that, no, they left in the 1st month of year 0 or whatever. You could call it year 1. This is the 1st year of the Exodus. And they left in the 1st month, and then where it says in the 3rd month, they count it from that. So they might say, well, no, that's the 4th month. That's not the way it reads. In the Hebrew, it seems to indicate now we're in month 3, day 1, year 1. Now, they stay there until year 2, month 2, day 20. So if you do the math, you go, well, how long were they at Horeb? This is important. All right. You go, well, let's count it up. I've got 10 months of year 1. I have 10 months of year 1 where they're there. If you count 3rd month, 4th month, 5th month, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10, 11, 12. That 10 months is from year 1. That's how much time they spent in year 1 at Horeb, Sinai. Then you've got the 1st month, that's month 11, and then 20 days into month 2. All right? So follow me on this. We've got at HOREB Sinai, the children of Israel, Moses and the children of Israel are at HOREB Sinai 11 months and 20 days, give or take, right? Give me a little bit of grace. I'm going off of these texts, and you are too. So that's what we think, roughly. So from Exodus chapter 17, 18, 19, remember in 18, he's there at the mountain too. That's the reason I'm saying maybe it's a little bit more, because he's there when Jethro comes back with his woman and the boys. So from, let's call it Exodus 17 all the way to Numbers chapter 10, it's approximately a year. Now, and we're going to look a little bit more at this, but here's a side note that I put in my notes. If the wilderness journeys equal 40 years, give or take, and Deuteronomy is all described, it's presented as being presented in the 40th year. Now, it's covering events throughout the wilderness period, but it's presented in the 40th year. So if I bracket Deuteronomy off as year 40, then from Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, why do I say 10, 11? That's when they leave HOREB Sinai, until the end of the book of Numbers, we're covering roughly 37 years. Now, what we're going to see in this study as we dig deeply, deeper than you've ever studied before, I can assure you, we're going to see overlap. We're going to see that some things in that 40th year description in Deuteronomy match up with events in Exodus and Numbers, not so much Leviticus, but we'll even have an answer for that. But there's going to be some, like you're pulling Deuteronomy, you're pulling Exodus and Numbers, and you're meshing them together. But Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, through the end of Numbers, it's like 37 plus years. Now, we're going to see how accurately and how much detail of that 40 years, give or take, is described by the priestly writers. You will be shocked to see how little is actually covered. But that's not the class today. I got you looking at 11 months and 20 days. Now, if you will bear with me, I'm not concerned with 11 months and 20 days. I want you to come closer with me. I want you to come closer because I want to focus on one day. Just one day. Just one day out of a period of 11 months and 20 days. Do the math. How many days is that roughly? Somebody type that in the comments to help the people like me who aren't that great at math. One day of all of those days. A day of great significance. A day of great significance to the priestly writers of our work. And it's in the Torah portion today, but it's also in another text. And it's also in even another text. And when we pull all these together, we get a better understanding of this one day that I want to look at and how much real estate in the book it actually covers. For the priest who penned this sacred work, this day is absolutely the most important day of that entire time, maybe excepting excepting, maybe excepting the giving of the Torah, because this day is the culmination of everything. This is the goal and meaning of that whole time there. Now, I would argue that the whole time, the meaning, the goal, the greatest event that took place was the giving of the Torah, the giving of the Aseret HaDevarim, the 10 words. But this writer doesn't think so. The priestly writer puts this day above all, and it's because of what took place on this day. Because the tabernacle is the goal and meaning of everything. the tabernacle is the goal and meaning of history and everything forward. It's where heaven and earth meet. And so Exodus ends with the raising of a place that was introduced for the first time as a beautiful concept. Look with me at Exodus 25, verse 8 and 9, page 144 on the Torah tablet. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them according to all that I show thee, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the furniture thereof, even so shall ye make it. And it's from this point forward that everything focuses on making this, making a mikdash, a holy place. This is where God is going to come live, according to the priestly writer. From this point on, the author, the priestly writer, we call this book Exodus, but the priestly writer gave us more than just Exodus. But this hand is telling us all about, in every detail, every aspect, for the most part, of this place. Now, it's all leading to, from Exodus 25:8, have them make me this holy place, to what we read in today's Torah portion, Exodus chapter 40. Go with me to page 250 in your Torah tablet. And here is what it all points to right here. Exodus 40, verse 1 and 2, and Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month shalt thou rear up, saith the ASV, the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. All right. So now we have a date. We have a date that says on the first day of the first month. We just need to know what year it is, right? Now look down at verse 17. Verse 17 says, and it shall come to pass, and it came to pass, in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up. All right? So here we've got an actual day, we've got a month, and we've got a year. So this is good. Thank you, priestly writer. This is typical of the priestly writer, very detailed. So now we can place this on a timeline. Now look at verse 33, and verse 33 sort of wraps it up. And he reared up the court round about the tabernacle and the altar and set up the screen of the gate of the court. So Moses finished the work. There it is. So Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8 and 9 says, hey guys, make me a sanctuary and I'm going to dwell in the midst of you, and so forth. And then you get all the way, you go through chapter 25, chapter 26, 27, 28, there's a major section on instructions, how you're going to make it, what you're going to make, what it's going to look like, who's going to wear it, how it's going to come down, who's going to do it. And then almost quite a bit of it is repetition after that says, remember what he said he was going to make? Well, he made it. Here it is. It's described here. It was already described before, but now I'm describing what was made. I'm describing what was made, and it's the same as what was described using the same words. And now I'm going to tell you the next thing that was made, which is used using the same words that were used to describe what was to be made. Now, and this goes on and on. All of this comes down to, and Moses finished the work. Date, month 1, day 1 in chapter 40 and verse 1, and verse 17 gives us that detail that this is year 2, month 1, day 1. This day is mentioned elsewhere. Where else is it mentioned, Ross? Glad you would ask me that. Look with me at Numbers chapter 7 and verse 1. And it came to pass on the day that Moses made an end of setting up the tabernacle and had anointed it and sanctified it and all the furniture thereof and the altar and all the vessels thereof and had anointed them and sanctified them. And then it continues. So now wait a minute. Exodus chapter 40, verses 1 and 2, verse 17, verse 33 says, on a certain date, the tabernacle was reared up. And it gives us that date as year 2, month 1, day 1. And then you go all the way to Numbers chapter 7, and it says, on the day that the tabernacle was raised up. That's a long time later. Now, you might say, no big deal. It's just referring back to that day. You just said that the priestly writer sees this as an important day. Yes, but there's more. So what I want you to do is I want you to understand that what is described in Exodus 40 is also mentioned in Numbers chapter 7. Now, I'm not going to totally jump into this because that would expand this class into a great book that someone needs to write one day, not today, or a new class that would be great that someone needs to teach, but not today. Namely, that on that same day that the tabernacle is raised, right, year 2, month 1, day 1, not only is it reared up and all assembled and so forth, but there is an anointing that takes place and a consecration that takes place. So there's a lot going on. This is one long day. And we're going to look at just an aspect of that. But one thing I want to tell you is that scholars have noticed that if you really want to understand the text, now I use the phrase horizontal reading, synoptic comparisons of biblical text to sort of discern what really happened by taking in all our sources and looking at them side by side for comparison and contrast. Scholars have recognized that Exodus 40 and Numbers 7 go together. That means it's like a tug of war. You pull Numbers chapter 7 all the way until it touches Exodus chapter 40. Now, how do you do that? That means that if we're dealing with chronology, I'm not saying we are, I'm insinuating we might be, then that means that everything that follows Exodus 40 and that ends right before number 7 is in one big ball between the same day. Now, what? It means that Leviticus takes place between Exodus 40 and Numbers chapter 7. Let me say it a little bit differently. This is part of the Anchor Bible series. This is the version, the edition, Exodus chapter 19 through 40 by William H. Prop. This is a prop, by the way, because in the text, in the description of this video, you'll see a link to get this book. William Prop says the following on what I just commented on, the space, the text between Exodus 40 and Numbers chapter 7. He says, quote, in other words, all of Leviticus and Numbers chapters 1 through 6 is contained within a gigantic parentheses. Between Exodus 40 and Numbers 7, time seemingly stops as Israel inaugurates the cult. Interesting. Inauguration of the cult, and the priestly writer says, stop and consider this. So from a careful review of the chronology in the Pentateuch, we need to align those texts that describe similar events in order to paint a complete picture. But wait, boys and girls, there's more about this day. You got to be kidding me, Ross. No, I'm serious. 3 texts now need to come together in a synoptic fashion in order to see the fullness of the priest's favorite day of the year. roughly a year. And that's these three: Exodus chapter 40, Numbers chapter 7, and Numbers chapter 9. You see the verses on the screen. We've already looked at chapter 40, verses 1 and 2, and verse 17. On the first day and so forth, it says that the tabernacle was reared. Numbers chapter 7 and verse 1, we read that as well. It says that on the first day, on the day that the tabernacle was raised up. That's clearly the same day as Exodus chapter 40, verse 1 and 2, and verse 17. Now I'm going to bring us another one. Look with me at Numbers chapter 9 and verse 15. Numbers 9 and verse 15. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, even the tent of the testimony, and so forth. So again, the priestly writer is really wanting us to focus on this one big, important day. It's the day the cult came to be. That's what it's really all about. So if Numbers 9:15 mentions the day that the tabernacle was set up, and Exodus 40 mentions the day that the tabernacle was set up, then we can take Exodus 40 and we can pull Numbers chapter 7 right up next to it. And we can pull 9:15 right up next to it. And we can say, all right, now let's look at the day the tabernacle was raised up, because that's the way Exodus ends. And you can skip Leviticus for one reason, and I'm not going to skip it. We're about to start a major study of Leviticus, but I want you to understand that that's part of a big, gigantic parentheses. So perhaps both of these texts tell the same story. All of these texts tell the same story, or tell of the events of the day the tabernacle was reared up, but they're different sources. Otherwise, you go, no, I think Moses wrote all of this. Well, he told us different things at different times, and it seems like it would make more sense to describe it together. But be that as it may, it just so happens that there is another element that ties Exodus 40 and Numbers chapter 9 together. But, now get this, there are differences. There are differences in terminology. There are differences in phrases. And ladies and gentlemen, there are differences in the hands of the people who wrote these texts for all of the reasons stated. So if I really want to study this, I'm going to put them all side by side. But for today's purpose, I want to pull Exodus chapter 40, verse 34 through 38, and I want to take Numbers chapter 9, verse 15 through 23, and I want to put those side by side. Now, on the screen before you, Numbers 9, 15 through 23 has been ellipsed. So in other words, I took out some of the text that's not really the focus, because the writer of Numbers chapter 9, verse 15 through 23, that, by the way, is set off by white spaces. You can see that kind of thing in the Torah tablets. We show you these sections, these pericopes that made it into the text. But this section goes into a lot of different vocabulary, a lot of different language, and gives us different things. Okay, so if I bring these two together, and I mentioned in Numbers 7 that it deals with the anointing and the consecration. That happens in the parentheses. You're going to see that in our study of Leviticus, why that doesn't get mentioned in either of these texts. It happens in the middle. But I want you to look with me. Let's read Exodus 40, verse 34 and following. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacle. I'm reading ASV. And Moses was not able to enter into the tent of meeting because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward throughout all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they journeyed not till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of Jehovah was upon the tabernacle by day, and there was fire therein by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. Okay, now we're going to look at numbers in just a minute, so we'll keep them up on the screen. But let me tell you this. Okay, so this is an interesting bit of information. It says to us that the way the children of Israel knew it was time to move is the cloud moved. The cloud is over Mount HOREB, Sinai, and it lifts and it goes somewhere else. As we read, it moved in the first case in Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. It says that the cloud lifted and it went over Mount Paran and it stayed there. That's the first time the cloud moves. But this is telling us in Exodus chapter 40 that cloud that covers the tent and the glory that fills that tabernacle, that cloud that covers the tent is the indication to all the people it's time to roll out. Now, there are other things, too. We're going to have trumpet blast and flags and all kind of stuff. You can't miss this truck. When it pulls out, everybody knows it, I promise you. Don't get nervous. So, but the big sign is that the cloud signals movement. And if the cloud moves, you move. If the cloud stops, you stop. Simple enough, right? Cloud moves, you move. Cloud stops, you stop. Watch the cloud, people. Now, in this text, I've highlighted certain things. You have underlines, you have red, and what I want to do is I want to draw out that the red indicates slight differences in phraseology. Like, for instance, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, says Exodus 40:34. And then Numbers 9:15 says, on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, right? So there are different words, right? And as you work through that, you'll see. Now, the underlined portions represent the similarities between the text. So you'll see cloud covered the tent, Exodus 40, Numbers 9, cloud covered not the tent. Well, then the next phrase has the tent. In Exodus 40, it's called the tent of meeting. Numbers 9 refers to it as the tent of the testimony. You see that? And then it goes through. You'll just notice the differences and the similarities. Tabernacle, tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over, that reads the same in both texts. Exodus 40 says the tabernacle. Numbers 9 says the tent. Then the children of Israel journeyed. All right, so you see this? So over and over. Now, by the way, I'm showing you the ASV, but some of you study ancient language. Some of you study Hebrew. You can look at the Hebrew, which I've done as well. I just didn't put that on the screen. We have similarities, we have differences, because these are from different hands. These writers, these authors, both felt that the tabernacle is the central point to which everything aims, the goal of the priestly literature. And so therefore, you have to have the story. But they're different sources, and they've been pulled together in the same document. But because things don't always occur in order, and there is, according to rabbinic writings, there's no early or late. There's also a few other excuses or reasons for this, but there are differences. And why would you mention it twice? Okay, we're going to take a little bit more of a closer look as we work through. Let me pull up the next text. 1 second. Okay. Now, when I think about this particular text and these two descriptions about how the children of Israel were to follow the cloud, one thing I want to point out is that Exodus 40, they've not left HOREB Sinai yet. This is a spoiler alert. This is the guy or gal sitting next to us in the theater and said, hey, let me tell you about this, that, that we just saw that the cloud covered the tabernacle. Let me tell you, whenever the cloud moves, we moved at past tense, and whenever it stopped, we stopped. And someone sitting there would say, don't tell me everything. Wait a minute, what'd you just say? You said whenever it moved, we moved. We hadn't moved yet, you see? And they won't move until later. So in Numbers chapter 9 and verse 15 through 23, it says, okay, the same person in the theater goes, hey, get this. I want to tell you something about what's coming. Every time that the cloud moved, we moved. Every time that the cloud stopped, we stopped. And you're going, wait a minute, what'd you say? Every time it moved, Numbers chapter 9, 15 through 23, they haven't moved yet. They don't move until Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. They've not left Sinai, HOREB, yet. Okay, because that is going to be in year 2, month 2, and day 20. So we've got 37 years left. Now I want to show you something else, but I want to illustrate it a little bit differently, and you don't have to be able to make much of this out, but look at this. If I hold up, this is the Pentateuch. So you've got, this is Deuteronomy. Can you see that? I'm going to hold that against my black shirt so you see about how thick Deuteronomy is. See, this represents Deuteronomy. And then this section represents Genesis, okay? So now I've got 3 sections. Can you see I'm dividing this? So this is Genesis, and I don't want to mess my book up, so I'm going to drop that out of the way. And then that is Deuteronomy. Now that leaves, this section runs from Exodus to up to chapter 19. So now look what I'm focused on. I'm focused on from the time they get to Sinai or HOREB. But that's not all we're focused on. If I go here, this is where they leave. So now we're looking at this much of the text. Look how much this leaves. That we're not, this one section covers about a year. And by the way, this covers a year too. I mean, you can do this exercise on your own based on what we're talking about today. There's about 40 years, but we're really focused on just a small amount of that 40 years, and that's going to be very plain as we work our way through. But get this, we have to watch the order of the narrative, or we have to watch the narrative, I should say, for indications of events that are out of order. So just like I'm trying to show that from this entire section from Exodus 40 to Numbers chapter 6 is put in a big parentheses because really Numbers 7 and Exodus 40 need to be pulled together. You see, that if we think about it that way, we're really zooming in, we're really being focused, but I want to share some inconsistencies in the order, even within what I just said. So you would think that the book of Numbers is logically in order, right? Even if you've got this big parentheses going on. But that's not the case. Look with me at Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And it says, "And Jehovah spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year after they were come out of the land of Egypt." And he gives the order to do a census. You go, well, that isn't, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it is that the date tells me that that doesn't go there. Now, look, it's important to me. If you want to give me chronology, why would you do this? Because we would all admit that most of us thought that the whole thing was in chronological order. But when it's not in chronological order, which is the exception, it ought to be a flag. I mean, why would you do that to somebody? You give somebody something and you put something in a different order. Again, the fundamentalist apologist answer is, well, it's teaching a different lesson. It's about theme. It's about theology, something else. But this says year 2, month 2, day 1. This date is out of place. In the nutshell, Numbers chapter 1 and the census needs to be pushed past chapter 7, past chapter 9, verse 15 through 23. It can't go here because you've got a later date in an earlier place. Make sense? Let's look at a chart. If we really want to make sense of this, there's a way to see it laid out before you. If the scroll was arranged properly, we have 4 clues in this section that we're dealing with. And the first one is going to be Exodus 40 and Numbers chapter 7. That's year 1, month 1, day 1. Okay, we just covered that. Very, I think, detailed. Now, the next section in the chronology is going to be Numbers chapter 9, not Numbers chapter 1, which is year 1, month 1, day 14. All right? And then comes Numbers chapter 1, which is year 2, month 2, day 1. And then Numbers 10, which is year 2, month 2, day 20. It's not meant, I'm not trying to be confusing. I'm trying to bring the truth out of these confusions. I'm trying to bring a method whereby we can notice the inconsistencies. So when we study the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, we're going to be bringing things together to show where things actually go, if they go at all. I'll bring those issues up as well. So the Hebrew phrase, Ein mukdam u'ma'uchar b'Torah. There's no early or late in the Torah, is just a saying. And it's really just a saying to cover inconsistencies. But for those who carefully read the text, paying attention, for those who have eyes to see, there actually is a later and an earlier in the Pentateuch. At times, we are going to see the hand of a writer from another time. It's like you're watching a movie, and that person keeps saying, hey, let me tell you what's going to happen. Later, when the Canaanites aren't in the land, you're like, Canaanites aren't in the land? What are you talking about? See, there are indications that say, I've come to you from the future to tell you things. It's clearly an anachronism. These other hands are writing before your very eyes. Spoilers. They're sharing information out of time. Again, the argument is not because these arguments, I'm not, it's not like I'll hold back if I believe this. But I'm just saying, as a general rule, these out-of-time insertions, these voices of the spoiler, I'm not even saying that they're all false, but they're written by another hand. And what I want you to understand is, whenever we deal with authorship, we've got to be honest to the text. We need to look at it and say, no. Yes, Moses wrote this. No, Moses didn't. If I see a spoiler that happens after the death of Moses, like after the 40 years, Exodus 16, that end part where it says that they ate until they went into the land, That's after the death of Moses. Read Joshua, right? So Moses didn't write that. You say, well, maybe Joshua did. Well, maybe. We'll get to that. But the question is not that. It's quit saying and attributing things to someone's hand who did not write it. Exodus ends on the day that the tabernacle was set up. And that's because the priestly writer has been bringing us along since Exodus 25, verse 8 and 9, saying this is going to be the crowning achievement of the priestly story. And indeed, not only does it appear in Exodus 40, it's going to appear in Numbers chapter 7. It's going to appear in Numbers chapter 9. Listen to me. The next 10 weeks, you and I are going to study within a gigantic parentheses. And we're focused. And you don't want to miss a single one of these classes. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. If you're with me here live, if you're part of the Yachad, join me in the Zoom call. You know where to get the link. If you're not yet part of the Yachad, thanks for coming. You can watch a part of our discussion on the YouTube video. The link is in the description. You'll probably be pulled there automatically. So don't go away. Don't change the channel. We've got another long bit of time as soon as I get some coffee. I love you. Hang around.